Okay, hello. So this is episode 53 of the Follow Mechanical Turks project. Not too much to look at today, in part, I guess, because we're kind of in the thick of the semester, so things have slowed down. What we want to do is take a look at some stuff related to preliminary data findings from the second product there. And then we'd potentially like to make a list of people to invite. Let's see, how do I mute this? This is probably a good time to try and identify guests. So if we make a list of people to invite, that might be productive right now when other things are kind of tricky.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Okay, so looking a little bit at some preliminary findings stuff. Let me share this. So this is something from OpenAI, and this is an institution we've been looking at before. They are principally known, I think, at this point for GPT-3. We've looked at before, although they've done other stuff that we've seen involving image recognition. So this is kind of a relevant thing because it's addressing some of the stuff we're doing in the second product here, right? So like this clip, as you can see, looks at essentially providing like image captioning, which we've talked about, and part of our tasks in the second product were summarizing images.
Right.
GPT-3, definitely we've talked about before. It's a language system, so it's doing a little bit more than just summarizing, but that's definitely relevant, as we'll look at here in just a bit. And then we can see like this generates imagery from text, I believe. Can generate. We found that just as a large transform model trained the same exact model trained on pixel sequences can generate coherent image completions and samples. So it's sort of a extrapolation from imagery. So why I bring this up is they posted this recently about summarizing books, right? And sort of how their accuracy, their human determined accuracy in summarizing books has started to get close to matching what humans do.
Yeah.
So if I scroll down here a little bit further, right, our best model is fine-tuned from GPT-3 and generates sensible summaries of entire books, sometimes even matching the average quality of human written summaries. It achieves a 6 out of 7. Similar to the average human written summary from humans who read the book 5% of the time. So that's parsing. That's a little tricky. But what it's saying is it gets a 6 out of 7, 5% of the time.
Oh, okay.
And 6 out of 7 is similar to the average human written summary. So it's not saying we're achieving similar to human. It's saying we're achieving similar to human averages 5% of the time. That's what it's really saying here.
Okay.
Well, the parsing is a little bit different. It's sort of like this, the 60% of the time it works every time. It's like that doesn't make any sense. Things kind of true here.
Yeah.
And a 5 out of 7 rating 15% of the time. So it's not like, there are a couple of things that are interesting here because 6 out of 7 is similar to the average human written summary. That's kind of interesting because it's like, why isn't the average human written summary 7 out of 7, given that humans adjudicate this, right?
Right.
What's being said there is humans aren't as a body that great at it either, right?
Right. That,
So
yeah, that,
you
that,
know,
which is kind of interesting, right? That both the GPT-3 and humans sometimes fail to live up to the criteria for human.
yeah, yeah. So I mean, these scores account for the range of human ability, right?
Yeah.
Um, Anywho, so I mean, part of what's interesting here is that it's getting close, and also the way it works, which it explains is it gives unit summaries and then summarizes its summaries. Right. So our model works by first summarizing small sections of a book, then summarizing those summaries into a higher level summary, and so on. So you can see the kind of iterative thing here. That's kind of interesting for certain reasons. I mean, one is I'd be interested to know, and it'd be tough to ascertain, but like, do humans summarize books by thinking, okay, well, what happened in this paragraph and then that paragraph, and then lumping that together into, okay, well, what happened in this page, and then lumping that together with, and then what happened in that chapter? I don't think so.
No.
I mean, it seems like humans give a gestalt. If you ask what happened in, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, you don't do. I don't know, but I don't think you do that process. I think you have sort of a larger scale. Here's what the narrative was. I think.
Right. Or some kind of affective markers of things that stuck out to you, or.
Yeah. So it's kind of interesting the way it works, and also how it's, in a sense, getting sort of better at this, at least as determined as human like. And this piece also is acknowledges that like when we say it's getting better at summarizing, that's always nested in a comparison to humans.
Yeah, who are themselves not equally right. That human beings aren't all good at summaries in the same way.
I guess we just switched books there. Yes. And so another interesting thing about this also is, so like, as it talks about here, right? And the headline as well, or the slug, right? Scaling human oversight of AI systems for tasks that are difficult to evaluate. What it's actually talking about here is the difficulty in evaluating the effectiveness of this model because the model gets better at it. So it talks about this here at the end where it says, right, this work is part of our ongoing research and so forth. As we train our models to do increasingly complex tasks, making informed evaluations of the model's outputs will become increasingly difficult for humans. So it's kind of interesting because what it's suggesting here is having humans make determinations about the output of the model gets harder as this gets better at it, right? This makes it harder to detect subtle problems in model outputs that could lead to negative consequences when the models are deployed. So it's like, in a sense, it's, if this were bad at it, it would be easier to tell. But as it gets better at it, it's tough to see, is the model flawed in a meaningful way? It's I don't know, it's sort of like if you're asking, a mechanic, it's like, every now and then I feel a vibration in my car, and it's like, just drive it. And he's like, I don't feel anything. It's like, yeah, it's because most of the time it's really good. There's only occasional moments where you can see there's a flaw here.
Or is it also akin to, the mechanic exam, weirdly enough, where I thought you were going is, let's say you're right. So I help my son I teach him to work on the car with my limited abilities, right? And the better he works, the more of a mechanic he becomes, the harder it is for me to know whether he's a good mechanic or not.
Right, sure. Or it's, he's good. It's harder for you to identify if he has a mistake in his education.
Right. Yeah. But this also seems to get at what Hales gets at with that whole notion of computer trading. Like it's doing it at such a level that human beings can't make sense of what's happening. And so, right, it ends up potentially crashing the market, and human beings have no idea what's going on or why.
Yeah, well, that aspect of black boxing, like we can't do this, that's kind of interesting, because something recent came out also that was about synthesized faces. This face doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And it turns out you can rewind those and find out what were the real faces that this synthetic one was trained on.
Uh-huh.
And so that may challenge the idea that we can't audit. I mean, the potential argument was the idea, well, we can't audit this, we can't figure out what's going on there, might not be accurate. Might be
okay.
It might be a way of just saying, geez, I don't want to open this Pandora's box, but like the way that sometimes people say, well, we can't do, like, a good example, a good, although contentious example might be like sort of the creator argument. Well, this is just too complex, so we can't understand it. It's like, no, you can't understand it.
Right.
It may be the argument, well, we can't even audit this. It's like, well, no, maybe we can, we just aren't yet.
Well, what's interesting is it suggests here that human beings will have to increase their own capacities alongside the AI.
Potentially, yeah. Or, I mean, like for our purpose, it's like, does what the human maybe needs to get better at discrimination. That's its role.
Right.
It needs to get better at discriminating very subtle differences between itself and the other.
Interesting. Yeah.
Maybe. And gosh, I don't know what to do with that either, because if it's like you're just leaning into a purity test. But,
well, I mean, right. That's, I mean, it's, yeah.
Anywho, I mean, and this isn't a long piece, although there is research associated with it. There's just some interesting points in this. Consider the task of summarizing a piece of text. Large pre-trained models aren't very good at summarization. In the past, we found that training a model with reinforcement learning from human feedback. I mean, that's part of this also, is the whole premise of this is talking about human complements to doing this.
Right.
Helped align model summaries with human preferences on short posts and articles, but judging summaries of entire books takes a lot of effort to do directly, since a human would need to read the entire book, which takes many hours. To address this problem, we additionally make use of recursive task decomposition. We procedurally break up a task into easier ones. In this task, we break up summarizing a long piece of text into summarizing several shorter pieces. Compared to an end-to-end training procedure, recursive task decomposition has the following advantages. Decomposition allows humans to evaluate model summaries more quickly by using summaries of smaller parts. So this is interesting, but it's also like, when it gets to this, it's also like, you might be missing the point.
Right. If you have to, if breaking up, right, the assertion that they're taking one task and breaking it up, it's like, no, you're creating entirely other tasks.
Yeah.
Like, this is now a different task, not the same task done differently.
Yeah. And, if the problem it's pointing out here is it takes humans a long time. Like, it's like, well, if I ask them to read Moby Dick and then evaluate this computer generated summary, that doesn't scale because I need you to read Moby Dick. And the solution here is, okay, well, I'll just give them a paragraph of Moby Dick and you tell me if this is a good summary. And then the premise is we lump all these together.
Yeah.
And the book summary is like, well, no, that's not what humans do, right? I mean, it's
Right.
like humans don't collectively assemble summaries of all the paragraphs and, unit those into pages and chapters. And
Yeah.
your approach to solving this problem is kind of has an interesting premise here that I'm not sure tracks. I'm not saying what they're doing is wrong. I'm just saying it's interesting and weird, sort of the judgments there, or the choices they're making here.
Well, because it's kind of what we talked about, right? In order to be able to evaluate the AI, we have to get the human beings to act like the AI.
Yeah.
Right? We have to make the task. We have to make the task into something that this AI can accomplish.
Right.
Which means to make it a different task. And then if we need a human being to then evaluate that task, the human being has to do the task in the same way that the AI is doing it, which is breaking it up in these discrete, right? So that again, the humans being trained to
it is interesting because it seems like it identifies a real problem, which is like, well, you can't just push the human to read Moby Dick faster. It doesn't scale, right? Where it's like, you just need to read this book faster. It's like, you can't really, it seems like you're going to pop out on that pretty quick. And so this approach is novel. It's interesting, but it might be like sidestepping, but you're still not getting a human-like summary of Moby Dick with this,
Right. And then then it goes back to our earlier conversations about what's meant by readable, right? Is it accurate? Is it right? This is accurate but unhelpful, or interesting but inaccurate, right? So what's their notion of what makes a good summary, right? Does it get all the details right, or does it make you want to read Moby Dick, right? I mean, do they want summaries, or they want book jacket summaries?
Yeah, I mean,
human beings summarize text for all sorts of reasons. I mean, it seems like what they're trying to do is, can we get a AI to do a book report? Or is it right? I mean, there's also a good summary of a book. Well, that right? What kind of, is it a critical analysis of the book? Is it just plot point, right? So even that, right?
Right, because a good summary of Moby Dick, is not going to recap the plot. It's going to allude to something like, this is the quintessential tale of human, hubris in the light of unknowable nature. And it's like, none of that it fucking manifests in the plot at all, right?
No, I mean, that summary would just be mostly, and then they talk about harpoons a lot.
Yeah, I mean, big chunks of that book are just like literal descriptions of whales and whale hunting. I mean, there's a reason why that book was also republished without all those chunks in there, right?
Yeah, which full disclosure, my favorite bits.
Yeah, right.
My review of Moby Dick is not enough harpoons.
Right. Not enough neutral description. Yeah, I mean, that's interesting because, I mean, like, if you're talking about book summaries, particularly of stuff like that, because I mean, it identifies, we had Pride and Prejudice, what I think, Adventures of Wonderland, Romeo and Juliet. I mean, the best summaries of those, I would think, would not be recaps of the plot. I mean, it's like, you won't be able to pull that out of the plot. Romeo and Juliet, I mean, the best summary of that is not, two young people fall in love but die before they get married or right after they get married because of tragic consequences. It's like, yeah, but that's missing why we're bothering to even discuss Romeo and Juliet. I mean, it's like,
I mean, ultimately, what's the value of these summaries, right? I mean, that's what you're saying, right? You're not wrong, Walter. It's just sort of uninteresting.
Yeah. And
because reading is what reading and summarizing, right? Those are really those can be lots of different things that are sometimes not about legibility or fidelity, or right, they're about something more gestalt or something more,
yeah,
right? Like, I mean, summarize Moby Dick, but I mean, right, I could also imagine a literary scholar saying, well, you can't summarize Moby Dick by just reading Moby Dick.
Yeah.
Right. You have to know what it
represents.
Again, that's probably not what you need GP3 to do. But if you're going to start saying, right, it's summarizing and reading, like, then you've opened up what those terms do, what they signal.
Particularly, I mean, there's also the kind of interesting thing, right, where it says, it's sometimes even matching the average quality of human written summaries, it achieves a 6 out of 7 rating. And I'm like, what rating? What are you talking about? Right? The idea that there's a numeric, I mean, it's like, is this like the AP score? I mean, which no, the numbers are different, so it's not, but it's like, what are you talking about? Because
what's a 7?
Right. I mean, any metric is going to have embedded inside it what you're looking for. Right? I mean, you've already, it's the principal ways numbers lie is that it's a 6 out of 7. It's like, yeah, but I mean, what you're saying a 7 is embeds the subjectivity of, this is what the summary is,
Yeah.
The entire back end. Anyway, so this is interesting for a lot of reasons, in part because looking at the preliminary findings, I haven't really, just because it's the middle of the semester, I have not had the ability to, or the opportunity to really get into them. But what I've been looking at sort of a top level, and we've already discussed how, one thing we were noticing in some of them that we were looking at was that they call attention to the humanity of the act, right? I mean, as we were sort of discussing, like some of the highest rated summaries readable summaries weren't ones that were descriptions, right? They were ones that acknowledged, I mean, some of the highest scoring ones would say, like, given that this is, based on what I can understand out of this garbled audio data, this is what it sounds. I mean, there are ones that call attention to the situation. We've already discussed this, right? Like the ones that got high ratings weren't necessarily ones that seemed to like be neutral vacuums of this is representation of the content. They were ones that acknowledged the summarizing task, that said, like, based on what I can tell from this, here's what I think it is.
Right.
So there was something in that, not only that calls attention to the humanness, but also calls attention to the ambiguity and uncertainty of it, right? It's very different to say, this is a picture of a father teaching his son versus it looks like the relationship between an older man standing over a younger person is a familiar one. And I think that he's teaching him math homework based on it calls attention to, like degree of confidence. Whereas, just a statement does not, right? A statement of fathers, let's say one that's wrong, right? Mother and daughter learn from an English textbook. It's like, that sounds confident and yet is also completely inaccurate. So in an interesting way, I mean, tapping into previous stuff we've seen in the first product, that there's a notion of like meta discourse in some of these summaries, these readable summaries that foreground this notion of telling, of making visible the act of the summary itself. Right?
Yeah.
It's not just making visible the content, it's making visible the act of doing it. That I'm engaged in this ambiguous thing where I can't even ascertain what the audio is. And here's what I think is happening, right? There's also related to this, these kind of intuitive leaps.
Yeah.
Like the move to cigarettes, right? That keeps coming up just because the number 18, I think.
Right.
And so like that's on one sense, in one sense that's inaccurate, but it's also kind of informative, because would GPT-3 make that kind of leap? I mean, maybe it would say two people are talking about cigarettes just because maybe it's been trained on a corpus of text that knows when the number 18 comes up, there's a certain amount of chance that you're talking about a legal aspect, cigarettes or getting drafted or whatever, you know. And so, you know, that sort of notion of contextual leaps, I think, is interesting for those reasons. Would a machinic summary make a leap like, oh, they're talking about cigarettes, or would it just focus on, as potentially is being discussed in this article? No, I mean, it's just like you summarize the task and then you lump the tasks together. I guess that's what I'm kind of curious about, is the degree to which something like this evaluation discussed in this article is using intuitive context.
Yeah.
And I don't have an answer to that, but it's interesting that the summaries we called for being done by humans make these intuitive leaps.
Yeah.
Even ones that are way off the mark. The fact that you're doing it is interesting.
Right. Yeah, there's still, yeah, I mean, like you said, they're intuiting what, I don't know, what the expectations are for the task or what they're supposed to be generating, and then fill that in with what readability might be.
Yeah. Yeah, because again, I mean, it's like, as we were just discussing with Moby Dick, it's like saying this audio file is about two people talking about getting cigarettes. That's like saying Moby Dick is about the human condition, right? Because there's nothing in the text that says that. It's the interpretation of that. The same thing's true with this. It's like you're making a judgment about, what do you want from me in terms of summary? Because, you know, it would be perfectly acceptable to say people are talking about 18. It's this judgment call about the task to say people are talking about cigarettes, right? It's this sort of like overarching leap to,
right. They can't. Yeah, right. The Turkers doing the task, they can't just want me to list the component parts.
Right.
They want me to summarize this, which means I need to assess it in some, but you know what? Yeah, right. I need to do more than just label all the parts.
Right. Yes. Right. And so
which goes back to what you're saying earlier, right? That summarizing Moby Dick by breaking it up into chunks, and then, right, like kind of what we're seeing is maybe what we're seeing actually goes what you were saying, which is that's not how human beings summarize texts. They don't. Here's what happens in the first second. Here's what happens in the second second. And then I'm going to take all those seconds and chunk them together. And now here's this summary of this 12-second audio clip.
Yeah. And, you know, I mean, potentially there's something there which we haven't considered, and really, I don't know if we could plumb given what we've got, but like there may be a presumption in humans when doing tasks like this, as we all do. I mean, you know, as every student always does, every assignment is always a little bit of trying to figure out, what does the teacher want from me, right?
Right.
I mean, in our classes, that's a big chunk of it, is trying to figure out what is it you want from me here, right? And so there's like, and there's a presumption also of a human reader. So like when you say summarize Moby Dick, there's probably a tacit presumption that's not stated, which is summarize that for a human, right?
Yeah.
Like, and so there's something in there like, you know, here's what humans want, which is partially, it's like, why should I give a shit about Moby Dick, right?
Right. That's part of the summary should, from a certain human perspective, should be, here's a summary that's somehow connected to the task of you should read this or you shouldn't read it, or
right. Value. there's a little bit of like a value claim embedded in that. This is worthy.
Right.
And here's why.
Particularly if it's 600 pages long. And I was just looking up an article we read in my teaching writing class last night. And the title of the article is, in fact, what do we want from this paper? Like that question of a student coming to you saying, what is it you want?
Yeah. And that's always kind of interesting because, you know, as a teacher, you in part don't want to own the subjectivity of, well, this isn't just to please me. This is,
No.
you know, but then, you know, particularly as rhetoricians, we're like, well, yeah, it is, because it's like, you know, you're writing tasks. Ultimately, that's what you do. It's like, you know, when you're on the job and your boss says, do this, you want your boss to say, okay, you did this correct. It's like, yeah, that's what tasks are, is trying to figure out the parameters and then suit them. And in this scenario, some of that is ascertaining what am I asking for in this assignment, you know?
Yeah.
Anywho, so yeah, and I mean there are some other things that we already touched upon that I was looking at, which is humans also don't, at least when we ran our thing, by and large, humans weren't kind of jerky about this, in the sense of readability has also a notion of accuracy tied to it, and like amount of content, because we touched upon, there were a lot of things that were readable, like single word responses, right?
Right.
Nice. That's readable in the sense of I get what you're saying, but those didn't win, right? Those didn't win the competition. So people weren't being like, you know, I guess people were operating in good faith in a sense, where it's like, you know, when we say readable, there is embedded in that hidden a notion of, well, it needs to be sort of accurate, right? Because nice is readable. A one word response is, you know, is readable. I can read it. I'm having no issue decrypting the symbols. I have a pretty decent understanding of how to define nice, right?
Right.
But that didn't win because people say, well, that's not a readable summary. It's readable, but it's not a readable summary.
Right.
And so I don't know. It was interesting. It's interesting as from a results standpoint that, you know, people, when they, you know, what they take a readable summary to mean, it's not like they're trying to game the system. You know, they have a good faith operator of, well, that has to touch upon some of its content to an extent.
Right.
Human. Yeah. I was, you know, I'm reading from some of my notes of some of the findings, right? And it says, I think we might be able to put in the methods the stuff about orality, literacy, digitality, and then the discussion point to stuff like seeing like a state to address making the human visible in these responses, not just the individual person, but a gestalt human within the system. This is that's what this does. It gives the human perspective rather than an individual's perspective. Anywho, because I was trying to think about in terms of like writing up the research. I think that might be sort of discussion stuff is this kind of dialogue about what this suggests the human is in
Right.
this. And I think it has to do with visibility. That's in part, why I was interested in like the seeing like a state, and then Eugene Wei's adaptation of that material toward principally social networks.
Yeah.
And in fact, he was somebody who I was wanting to reach out to as a guest.
Ooh, smooth transition.
What's that?
Smooth transition.
Yep. I'm a professional. I'm a professional doctor, to see if he'd, be able to do that. Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, I was thinking maybe I'd want a little better handle on the findings before we talked to him. So it wasn't quite as nebulous, but still, we'll see. And also often it takes a little while to make schedules work with this kind of thing anyway. So I was probably going to reach out to him first, maybe. The other people I was considering were the folks who did the being a Turker piece. Some of whom I think I'd have to recheck, but I think some are academics and I think some are in industry.
That's right. It was a mix of, I think some were at Xerox, right? Was that?
It may have been.
Why I'm thinking that. I got that piece right here.
Yeah, I've got it.
One is at a university, and then 4 of them are at Xerox Research Center.
Boy, Xerox, they've got their fingers in a lot. I mean, the whole of computing history is tied to Xerox. It's, famously where sort of the first consumer level GUI interfaces were created, but Xerox didn't really see a future in it. And so they got their IP sort of more or less stolen by both Steve Jobs and Bill Gates.
Ruh-roh.
Interesting that they're still just sort of like in research for stuff when, you mostly associate them with photocopiers.
Yeah, while we have them on, we should ask them questions about our photocopier at work.
Yeah. How do I change my cartridge? Because
so I like your ethnographic approach to Turkers. Can you make these cartridges so I don't get ink on my hands every time I change them out? Is that, you do both those things? Is that both of your departments?
And why are they what is it per ounce? Toner is more expensive than gold. I think that
yeah, me and Ron Paul want to move the country to a toner-based economy.
Standard. Anywho, so that's what who were you contacting?
So I'm thinking of reaching out to Bernard Geohagen, who's done some work on that maybe I'm going to reach out to him anyway, but that probably will be a good conversation to have for the third product. But I really would like to for us to talk to Sarah Pink, who is an ethnographer and does stuff on digital, but her recent work is actually on like online social work and things like that. So it might be interesting to kind of a notion of readability. And I know that we're not necessarily, and for good reasons, wanting to explore the trauma aspect that we got at in the first publication, but I think she might be someone that's just interesting to talk to about just digital ethnography in general. But some of the stuff that she's currently working on is I don't know, adjacent or complementary to what we're working on.
Okay, cool. I think that's, it'd be awesome if we could, particularly because won't really be able to dive into the findings till the semester ends. Always gets like this.
Yeah. No, chats are easier to manage at this point. And another person and this might be both these, they're both, as far as academics go, big deals. But Andrew Ferguson has a book out on the rise of big data policing. And that might be interesting in terms of questions of visibility and reading and, interpreting activity. Right. The idea of this is potentially completely unrelated to the work that they might be doing, but right, the notion that someone overhears a conversation and hears 18 and thinks cigarettes. right? Like they're thinking, you know, I don't, right? You can see like that notion of how does illicit activity get read, and you know, someone hears a conversation like that and immediately jumps to its legal import or
Right.
implications based on a scant amount of information and a particular way of reading that information.
Yeah. Yeah, I've got that whole and what book is this now? Do you know the title?
The rise of big data policing.
Yeah. Yeah, because I've got like a whole thing of links on algorithmic. It's sort of like it's pre-crime, and then also things like tracking recidivism and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But then also, I've got a lot of stuff about algorithmic bias. And I mean, at least we're conscious of it. It's like we're pretending like they're neutral, but that doesn't undo what they're sort of the damage that they do.
Right. There, if how you feel about it is not unimportant, but once you've installed it, it's doing it. It's doing it.
It's an interesting topic. All right. Well, I think that's the gist. Jesus, this took 45 minutes.
Yeah, I know. Just a quick check-in.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's next steps, and we'll see. I mean, we may be missing some of these meetings as we did last time because there just wasn't really anything to do, because unless we get guests locked in, I don't know how much we're going to be able to even look at the findings for another 6 weeks or whatever. So
yeah, we're going to unwrap these findings as our Christmas present.
Yeah. Okay, there's this, and the two other things. This will all be fine.
Okay.
Oh, have you watched the series Devs by any chance?
No, it's on my list.
Same boat, but I eventually, I go very slowly because I basically get 30 minutes while I eat lunch to watch something.
Yeah.
But that was on the list and I started. It's there's some interesting things there, but there's also, I'm not quite finished, but they're also sort of like, he's like, I promise everything's going to be okay, when clearly things are not going to be okay. I mean, this is fine, dog. But
no, I'm in a pattern of avoidant behavior. So there's new shows I want to watch. So instead of trying to pick which one, I just go back and watch something I've already seen. So I'm just rewatching the Venture Brothers.
Yeah, that's a known phenomenon.
Yeah.
That's an interesting piece, and it also kind of taps into. I'm not quite sure yet, but there's something in the aesthetic of that, and some other things that I think is meaningful. I don't know. I don't want to talk about it here, I guess, but
yeah.
I guess minor endorsement when you have an opportunity. It's an interesting show.
Yeah. No, and it's related, so I can log it as research.
Right. Yeah. What was it? It was Squid Game. I was like, I think I have to watch that for research purposes now.
Yeah. Yeah, I felt the same. There's certain things that come out. I'm like, I guess I probably need to know about that.
Yeah.
It's a similar list to things I suspect students will ask me about.
Yeah.
And I'm like, do I really want to have a hot take on this for class? I do. No.
All righty. Well, all right. That's the gist of it.
Yep. Okay.
All right. Well, I will talk to you soon.
All right. Later.
See ya.